Welcome back to another episode of A Measure Passion. Today I've got Dana with me, and she's going to be interesting because she's an acupuncturist as well as does herbal medicine. She loves to travel and she loves to meet and interact with people of all cultures. And so, welcome, Dana, to the podcast,
Thanks.
Measure of Passion.
Thanks, Georgina. Good to see you, and thanks for inviting me here today.
Yeah. So, the goal of this podcast is really to talk to people who are passionate about different things in their lives. And I know that when we first spoke, you were talking about your love for traveling as well as how you found yourself into studying acupuncture and healing arts kinds of things.
Mhm.
So I want to go back, though. I want to go back to your love for traveling and where you think you developed that.
All right. So I've been thinking about this even more since we initially touched base on it, and
Yeah.
I feel like in some ways I have more and less insight, to be honest. So part of it, I think, is just so much of who I am and part of my fabric and who I've always been. And I think, I have a good friend who loves baseball, and since he was young, has memorized all the statistics from the different games and different innings and everything like that. And that's just part of who that person is. And so I think part of it is just ingrained in my own fabric. But also, as we had discussed, and I've been thinking about too, there's a lot of family influence with that as well. So part of it, both of my parents loved traveling, and they were great about my siblings and I having a lot of opportunities in life and being exposed to a lot of things. And I think it's something that the older I get, the more I acknowledge that and I appreciate it and see how much that's actually made me who I am today. Um,
Yeah.
so we took a lot of family trips as a kid. We did a lot of cultural excursions and did a lot of things from the arts to camping to the arts with the museums and opera. And then we'd go up to the Boundary Waters with my dad and some of my cousins and his side of the family. So we're always just kind of exploring. Um, Also, both my parents in their own ways, I think or my mom's deceased. So sometimes the tense might be different when I'm talking about my parents. Um, Very curious and intellectually curious people and wanting to know things and how things work and kind of do the research and just explore. And I think also kind of an unspoken open mindedness things too.
I was just going to say, I know that you talked about some of the trips that you took when you were younger and maybe even studied abroad and things like that. Can you walk us through some of those fun adventures that you were on?
Sure. So part of I mentioned too, just I knew at a young age that I wanted to live in France one day. And I've been trying to pinpoint maybe where that initiated. And part of me doesn't know completely, but also some of my earlier memories is one of my grandfathers carrying me around. And he loved France and he had a proficiency in the language and would often sing French songs and say expressions in French. And so some of my younger memories are of that. And so that might have been an influence in my desire to in France one day. My mom also, she had hoped to raise all of my siblings and I bilingual. And so she really strived to do that. Um, that didn't quite work out as she had hoped. But even with that, like when I was a young child, we had an au pair stay with us for a while. We were active in a number of school and church exchanges. When I was a teenager, we did a private exchange with a young Frenchman who I still consider my French brother to this day. And he would come and spend part of a summer with us. I went and spent part of a summer with his family. His family then introduced me to some of their friends, and I spent some time with them. I feel like that really opened up a lot of doors and experiences for me too, and that was in high school. I also knew, and I'm not sure exactly at what age, but I really wanted to study abroad at some point in my undergraduate term. So when I was looking at colleges, that was one thing that was also important to me is that the university that I went to had some sort of program. So I ended up going to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And there were so many reasons I chose that university, but one of them is they have a lot of programs in overseas and exchanges, and they actually have a branch campus in Luxembourg.
Oh,
So, yeah, so, and I can't remember the whole history of that, but I did apply for that program, and I spent my junior year in Luxembourg with a host family. And it was really a great experience in so many ways because you're learning about different things, whether it be politics, art, or culture. And my undergrad was political science, which we can get into some of my motivation in that too. Um, but you would be in class and then Friday afternoon go to the train station. And sometimes we had plans on where we wanted to go, and other times we would just hop on a train and go somewhere. And there was also times that we'd be going somewhere, whether usually I was with friends, but the more I traveled, the more I did a little bit on my own as I continue to do more so now. But we'd be going through and there'd be a really neat town. It's like, hey, let's stop off and jump off here. And I don't know if some of these opportunities exist as much now post 9/11 as they did pre 9/11, but a lot of the train stations, at least at the time, had lockers. So if you want to just like throw your bag in a locker for several hours and go explore or hop around. And I found the train system in Europe just so convenient and easy, and you can just get everywhere. And with the France part too, when I came back, I had minored in political science and French and European area studies. And going back to, I knew I always wanted to live in France someday. The French Ministry of Education has a program where they have English speakers with proficiency in French teach in the French public school systems, like English is a second language program. So my French professor, myself, and some other of my classmates know about that. And I applied. And I know at the time they said with the application, like, oh, don't put Paris down. Everybody wants Paris. And I'm thinking, well, heck, might as well throw my name into the hat for that.
absolutely.
Yep. So like, well, you don't know until you try. So I put down Paris, and I ended up getting a high school in the suburbs of Paris. So I lived in Paris and I reverse commuted to the school. I had a tiny, tiny little studio apartment and taught conversational English at a French high school a few days a week. Otherwise, yeah, when I had an opportunity, I'd jump on trains and go visit the rest of the continent as much as I could. And as my Luxembourg experience, I was with a group of Americans in Europe. When I went back, I was living in France. I was trying to not just have the American experience there. I was trying to break away from that a little bit. I mean, I'm going to be American wherever I am, but I was just trying to integrate more in different ways, and developed a very broad, both French community and a lot of other expats so that were in Paris at the time.
I definitely see that as a developmental kind of experience. I think when you're new to a culture, you try to stick with what you're familiar with. And then as you get more confident or experienced, you sort of start to venture out on your own or really meet other people and let that lead the way instead of feeling like you need to have a tribe that you can explore with, right? So I think I think it's very natural as an approach of your comfort for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Thank you. And then, yeah, when I came back to the States, and I'm kind of oversimplifying some of those pet story, but I was hoping to stay in Europe longer than I did, but part with job and visas and everything like that. I came back, and the reverse culture shock is very real. And that was very challenging for me. And there was something I was fortunate enough for about two and a half of about a three and a half time period, that time frame, I was in Europe. And so you come back and it's simple things as, oh, I'm paying this much for a sandwich. Is that how much I should be paying or not? Because all your vantage points are from another culture or another experience or structure, even in ways like, how much is a sandwich overpriced or not? Your mindset has to switch over. Yeah, and then when I was living in Chicago, I started taking French classes again because I didn't want to lose that. And then I ended up between work and social and a number of other things, and really getting involved with a lot of the expats that were in Chicago. So even though I lived in Chicago for 14 years, And I have a lot of American friends from that time period. I also just developed a wide range of friends from all over the country with that too. So I just think once you kind of start the momentum, it just keeps growing in different ways through my own travels and connecting with people.
And do you think that that your traveling impacted your schooling or your interest in political science in a specific way? It seems like they would be a nice blend, your love for traveling as well as sort of your your political interests, whether they're domestic or international. Because I know that your career was also evolving at that time. And so how
Mhm.
did your career develop with the additional experiences of your travel?
Yeah, so part of it, when I went into undergrad, I was undecided. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I think part of that, um, kind of always been a generalist, or most of my life have been a generalist. So sometimes it's like, oh, I want to do a little bit of this, I want to do a little bit of that. I'm curious about this, I want to learn about that. I just find that I'm a lifelong learner in a lot of ways. So part of what pulled me to political science in undergrad was my international interest and desire and experience. Part of it too, I wanted to work with people and help people. So my goal, I think, when I was entering political science was like, okay, maybe eventually I'll be working at an international NGO and either be boots on the ground somewhere or working for like an offshoot of the UN or one of those. So that had a strong impact. I was hoping to take my career and be overseas the longer I was. So with the political science, I ended up getting an opportunity to work for a congressman, and I worked in his district office for a while, actually as an immigration caseworker. So it was also interesting for me having lived overseas and gone through my own immigration side as the American in another country, and then I was helping other people with their naturalization or their visas in the U.S. And then I worked for the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations for a few years, and I worked with the corporate programming department. And so a lot of that was international heads of state, heads of government, trade ministers, and the like. So it was really fascinating. I always say that that time period of my life, I felt like I was almost living The Economist. There'd be these stories, whether it's business or cultural, other things about these different international players. And I'm actually was fortunate enough at a young age to be able to sit in a room and hear them speak and interact in person. And I found over time that um, it was evolving more into like a event planning, fundraising capacity. And as much as part of me really enjoyed that, I knew long term I didn't want to be particularly a fundraiser. And it seems like sometimes you kind of get pigeonholed in certain ways. And even though you have a lot of skill sets that are transferable, you kind of get pigeonholed into a particular context or job capacity. Um, Kind of knew at one point that I would probably go back to grad school. I wasn't sure what that would be, and I explored different things at different times. But when it's leading to then the evolution to my acupuncture career, um, my family also was very holistic and continues to be in a lot of ways. And so I grew up with that. And of course, like we had a large garden to just our approach in healthcare and our approach a lot of other areas. Um, and that's always been a strong part of who I am as well. And so I was doing a lot of soul searching at the time on, what I should do and professionally and whatnot. Um, Kind of came together in a way where I knew a lot of people at the time who could have either benefited or would have liked to have had another alternative to healthcare than our traditional Western model. And I was going through something at the time as well. And my boyfriend at the time was like, oh, go get it checked, go get it checked. And it was more of a nuisance for me, but I'm like, okay, I'll go get it checked. And I was fortunate at the time to have been healthy and um, been able to not be on a bunch of pharmaceuticals and everything like that. And I went to a clinic, saw a doctor, only spent like 5-10 minutes with him, and he didn't run any tests, didn't offer to run any tests. It's like, okay, well, here, we're going to put you on, I can't remember, his 14, 16 pharmaceuticals a day for the next month and come back. And I was like, okay, as somebody who hasn't been on any, that's a big jump. And then hadn't been officially tested for anything. So one question I remember asking him is, well, if this does go away in a month, how will we know which one it is? And he said, well, we won't. And I was just thinking about everybody that I know that, like, I know somebody who died as a cascade of pharmaceuticals they were on. So they died of something that was completely unrelated to their ailment. And I'm not meaning to come across negative on Western medicine, just sometimes there's alternatives or other options, depending on the situation. So actually, I from the sidewalk of that clinic, all acupuncture schools, part of the education is having on-site like clinicals, and so they all have a clinic. And I've been seeing that advertised around Chicago. So I called one of the schools and was able to get an appointment and started getting acupuncture treatments. And just with that, in a different way, it was really beautifully pulling together a lot of how I was raised and a lot of my own belief systems and how the body wants to be healthy and it should be healthy. There's just things kind of out of whack. Um, and if I think I mentioned earlier, my dad was a business owner. So I grew up, the dad was a business owner. My mom was always very pro having your own business if you can. So I grew up with that entrepreneurial mindset as well. So when I was pulling together not just some of my professional goals at the time, but also my lifestyle and philosophy, and then my initial desire to go into political science and wanting to work with people and help with people, just hold it together in a way that I was obvious to me or maybe available to me, or I didn't think it's an option previously. And there's some ways too, you have to go through your own life experiences too to find your path in some ways. So I feel like it all is connected in one way or another.
Yeah,
Um,
I definitely feel like experiences build on things and then lead you in different ways. Without the health situation you were in, maybe you would not have gotten to experiment with acupuncture and realize the benefits of that in a very personal way. And usually those personal experiences are the ones that then make us pursue something connected to that, or the way that it made us feel, or
right.
a relief that you wouldn't have to be on so many pharmaceuticals and things. Given your experience and now your career in acupuncture, have you ever visited Asia at all, or is that something that you might have as a goal for the future if you haven't already visited that part of the world?
So I have, but not in an acupuncture context. So, oh, so, actually my family, when I was, I think it was either when I was eighth or ninth grade, um, we went to Thailand and then did a brief little stint into then Burma. And just loved it. It was fascinating. So again, with the travel with my family. Um, when I graduated from grad school, the acupuncture program is 4 years full time year round. And as much as I loved it, I kind of needed a little bit of a break. Well, two of my last three international trips were with a group, and they do small groups. And so I found one that was going through Indochina for a month. So we started and ended in Bangkok and spent about a week in Thailand and northern Thailand, then about a week in Laos, and then about a week going through Vietnam, and then about a week going through Cambodia. So there are, through a lot of the acupuncture schools, not a lot, but through a few of them, there are programs where you can go for, I think they usually average about a month, to China and go to one of the, we call it like TCM, traditional Chinese medicine universities, and take classes and observe in the clinic and different capacities. I've really wanted to do one of those. It's just the timing of when I was in school and when they've been offered and everything like that hasn't quite lined up yet.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely. And so I'm curious or if you don't mind sharing with some of our listeners who may not be completely familiar with the art and science of acupuncture, can you tell us a little bit in a nutshell, sort of what is the treatment process for that, or the pathway, and how does it actually help alleviate pain or other kinds of bodily issues that individuals are struggling with? And I don't know if there's a common condition that is best known for. I think in my experience, I think it can treat just about anything. But if you wouldn't mind giving us a professional kind of an on acupuncture and what, uh, what our listeners might be able to take advantage of that for their
Mhm.
own personal reasons.
I know, I think it was the UN several years ago, um, through their own evidence-based studies, compiled a list of things that they have proven that acupuncture is effective with. I would say it is much broader than what they've actually listed too. Some of the underlying philosophy, as I mentioned, is it's looking at the individual and the body as a whole and not just your body, but also like my initial intake is usually very well, it's not usually, it's more thorough. We're asking about somebody's sleep and somebody's diet and their stress and emotions and exercise and hydration. And so there's times if somebody's like they like say ice cold water opposed to hot tea. There's just different ways that we break things down. So, or if somebody's not sleeping well, instead of saying like, okay, here's some sleeping medication, and I don't mean to be over generalizing or stereotyping or anything like that. But it's like, okay, do you have trouble falling asleep? Trouble staying asleep? Is um, a lot of the patients I work with right now have elements of like PTSD. So is there a component with that? Do you have back pain? Like what's the underlying cause of why things are happening or not happening? So our initial intake is usually very, again, keep saying usually, and I shouldn't, um, very thorough at looking at somebody and their whole life and within the context of that. When we're reevaluating that too, we're seeing, how things are changing. One thing that I really love about it, outside of just the personalized care to it, is that a lot of times when you're rebalancing things, because with acupuncture, like the body should be healthy and it wants to be healthy, just something's kind of out of balance. And my job and other acupuncturists is to find out what's out of balance and rebalance that. So, um, I find that a lot of people have like positive side effects. Like, for example, I recently had a patient who I've been treating his low back pain and sciatica, and his sciatica is gone. So we're working more the low back pain in the hips. And he said to me, oh, Dana, I never told you that I've been suffering from migraines and I haven't had one for a few months now. And nothing else has changed. I'm like, oh, that's really exciting. So there's times people are saying, oh, my sleep's better. This is better. I've had people say, like, oh, I feel more at peace with myself or connected to things in ways that they hadn't before. So with acupuncture too, there's many different styles of acupuncture. And they said, oh yeah, when they do a point for somebody's lower back, or they do a point for somebody's neck or their digestive system, like that part in their brain is actually lighting up too. So that's one thing that's been interesting is acupuncture is 2 to 3,000 years old. So, and a lot of the many texts were unfortunately destroyed during the Cultural Revolution in China. But with modern technology, they're also trying to investigate some of the overlaps with that. There's been some studies in Korea that where the acupuncture channels are, there's some stem cells. So if you're stimulating stem cells, that's stimulating growth and regeneration with that. One of the styles I use too quite a bit is it's kind of like a mirror and imaging. So how some parts of our body correspond to other parts of our body. So like if somebody has really, really strong, like an acute ankle injury, I don't necessarily want to go in there directly. So I'll treat the opposite wrist. Found there's different ways that the body connects and interacts with itself. And it's this very elaborate, beautiful system. Some of it, and I can't remember the specifics on this, but they've also found like correlations between the eastern and western side. Like, for example, there's 12 acupuncture channels on the body, and there's some other points thrown as well, but there's 12 main channels. They all associate with an organ system, which is similar but different than how we usually think of our organ systems. But with Chinese medicine too, with the 12 hours of the clock, um, each organ system has like a 2 hour window. So, like if I'm asking somebody, oh, you're not sleeping well, is there a time you usually wake up? Some of that will give me some insight about what's going on there. So when like the heart is the weakest is also the time in Western medicine that they have found that people are more likely to have heart attacks. So there's this really interesting kind of correlation that's still being explored between the overlap and how it works. But I just found through the 3,000 years that acupuncture has existed, just all the studies that they've done and um, the success they've had and trial and error over time. It's just a very elaborate, beautiful system.
It is, and I think that's the magic of it is trying to. I mean, some people have a hard time believing in acupuncture
Yeah.
because there isn't. It's been around for thousands of years, but on the other hand, it seems a little bit less researched or something. Where, especially in Western medicine, I've also talked to physicians who just simply can't. They negate anything that isn't part of Western medicine, and I think that's a real disservice to your patients. Even in our area here in the western suburbs of Chicago, there's a huge interest within our population and our community for integrating Eastern and Western
Mhm.
practices. And I think when you work with physicians who are so adamant about Western medicine only as being the correct way to treat a patient, I think you discount a whole section of medicine that that a patient could really take advantage of. And so
And
it's really unfortunate when your practitioner is not open minded to incorporating what works for the patient, not what you're comfortable with. And
mhm.
that's one of the things that I struggle with practitioners all the time, because you really should be doing what's best for the patient and
Right.
how the patient is receptive to it, not
Mhm.
necessarily what's in your wheelhouse and negating everything else. Um, but thinking a little bit about, how this, I mean, obviously you do this for work, but how does this passion of yours impact your personal life? How does it also enrich your life when you're not practicing in your office?
Um, we had a garden growing up, so just eating really healthy was a big part of my upbringing. Um, and then I became a vegetarian at 13, which probably drove my parents kind of crazy, but ended up being supportive of it. Um, but even going through acupuncture school too, part of that is I have a minor in nutrition, part of that education as well. And so that's both Eastern and Western nutrition. So a lot of that is, what we think about with nutrition is your vitamins and your minerals and this, that, and next thing. On the Eastern side, it's also looking at, and we hear a little bit about, or it's becoming more spoken of, is like eating for the season. And so we also break down like with foods that, and this is the same thing with herbal medicine as well, is how different foods and herbs, they have different flavors and characteristics and temperatures, and how um, those flavors and temperatures, how they affect the body. So um, and then there's now more talk in our society too about there's a rise of gluten sensitivities and allergies and a lot of other things that a lot of other countries don't have to the extent the US does. I know one thing in our culture is a lot of Americans, you go for, okay, I'm going to get the biggest thing of whatever beverage with all the ice in it. And in Chinese medicine, we stay away from the ice because ice is cooling, it's constricting. So it can inhibit digestion, it can inhibit flow of things. So that was probably one of the more obvious things when I went to acupuncture school. I was like, okay, I was the American with a big old thing of ice water. And now if we were to go out to eat, I always say no water, no ice. So there's just little things like that.
Yeah.
Um, that's one of the more obvious ones, top of mind. But
Were you still vegetarian?
no, not completely. That actually was an influence of grad school as well. So, um, going back to grad school and talking about nutrition, and they're not part of the philosophy is like making sure that you're getting all your nutrients. So they are more pro eating meats. And so it brought more of that perspective in for me. I still don't eat beef. Still about 95% vegetarian. I really struggled with that because it's so much of who I am and a lifestyle and trying to incorporate it. One of my reservations when I started incorporating meat again was, okay, I haven't gotten all the antibiotics and growth hormones and everything else, the preservatives and everything that we add to our meats. Am I going to be doing worse, putting myself in a worse off situation by adding those that I haven't had before? Going back to the international and the travel, a lot of other cultures do um, have more of like a plant-based or more support for the plant-based. And so traveling and living in the city and being exposed to people from a lot of different cultures, Also dietarily, when I was a vegetarian, I gravitate to making
Yeah.
more international food.
I've been introduced to, which I've really quite enjoyed, is Zoe,
Oh,
ZOE, and it's a nutrition and dietary health based on science.
okay.
And since I've started listening to the Zoe podcast, it has really sort of debunked a lot of things that I believed in. I'm a GI patient for 25 years, and
Mhm.
they do a lot about gut health and sort of the pro and prebiotics and
Mhm.
things like that. They really talk a lot about, if you eat a healthy, balanced diet, you don't really need a lot of supplements. They're
Mhm.
the first group I've heard that there's science basis of not really needing a lot of supplements. I mean, this does require you to eat healthy and
Mhm.
a variety of foods. But, those of us who might have thought just popping supplements instead of eating green vegetables or a variety of different colors in your food, that
Mhm.
you really can't replace that with pills. And
Right.
so it is a very specific podcast that talks about different issues like that. He touched about allergies. They did a whole session about, comparing our culture to other cultures and allergies, and why are we finding that more and more people and children are having allergies, whereas other countries similar to us, like England or Canada, don't have the same kinds of issues. And
Mhm.
so it is a very interesting podcast, and it is all based in science. And they're not very well known because they don't take they don't do sponsorships or corporate funding or ads. And
Mhm.
so they do ask that we spread the word. And since
Okay. No.
this is the topic about nutrition, I thought I'd share it with you because I think you'll find it fascinating. It's available where all podcasts are available. Um,
No, I'll
but
check it out. I hadn't heard of that one. So,
yeah, but getting back to you, just wanted to ask you, how has your passion? You've been in acupuncture now for a while, and you've
mhm.
been traveling throughout your life. How do you feel that your passion has changed over time, or where do you think your passion is going to lead to next?
That's a really interesting question. I feel like with both in their own way, I feel like I need like multiple lifetimes to thoroughly explore both. Um, on the acupuncture side, I reference that there's different styles of acupuncture, and similar to Western medicine, we're the end thing where we start off all being kind of trained as generalists, and then a lot of us over time specialize a little differently. So I specialize more in pain management, and I do some like sinuses and headaches and um, post stroke. I find that fascinating. Um, recently learned about some classes about like the fascia in our body and how they're corresponding different acupuncture points with how the fascia connects within our body. And my greatest teachers are actually my patients. Like I learn so much from them and their experiences and the results they have. Um, I'm always learning there. So I feel like that's a multiple lifetime exploration. I feel like on the travel side, I just love exploring and meeting people and seeing things and learning the history and how the interconnectedness of us all. And I find even though like culturally and whether it's politically or religious or all sorts of things in so many ways on the surface, there's differences and there's always going to be differences. It's just we're all so much more alike too than I think we really um, give credit for. And um, just when things happen in the world, whether there's an earthquake in Nepal or something happens, like, oh gosh, I know somebody there, let me just see if they're okay.
Mhm.
And so there's a greater connectedness with the world.
Let me ask you this.
Mhm.
As we get to the end of our time, part of my love and why I wanted to start this podcast is because I feel like passion really ties us to our purpose. And as we get older, we're thinking about what is the purpose of our lives and what is the mark we're going to leave on, the universe when we leave. And so I'm curious about you and how you see how does your purpose and your passion tie together? And what is the mark you'd like to leave?
Um, that's a great question too. Um, on the travel side, I just believe I'm just an advocate for a lot of people, especially, well, people of all ages. But I really value being fortunate enough that my parents gave me a lot of experiences when I was younger, because I think that really shaped who I am. Um, so I don't have any children, but my nieces and nephews or other youth, it just whether you do a volunteer program somewhere or a school program or through your church or another organization or independently travel, or I feel like having that exposure is really important. And I just think that's it just shapes you in so many ways that I think just for our own society and individually, micro and macro is just such an important thing to have. Um, and it breaks down a lot of the other prejudices, or like I was saying, we're more alike than not. Um, so I guess for myself and others, as much as I can, I don't really think I'm just do
I know. We
just
just do the
kinda
work, right? We just
yeah,
do the
just do the
work.
work. And as I mentioned, my patient's like, "Oh, I haven't had migraines since I started acupuncture. I never even told you that." I think there's ways. I mean, I saw something online the other day, um, and we've all seen variations of this, that you never know the impact you've had on people. As much as I can help people, I know with my patients, because there is a sense of vulnerability, like I'm putting needles in people's bodies. So it's really important for me to have open communication with them, that they feel very comfortable being with me.
I think the work that you do is exceptional. And I think even, informing the people in the community you work in to share that, this is something that exists. And unfortunately, I think for many of us, we discover some of these treatments when we've run out of other Western options. And I know a lot of people who just struggle with migraines or other things, and they just feel like Western medicine doesn't give them any relief. And a lot of physicians might say, well, I've done everything I know how to do, but then they don't necessarily go the next step and, have you tried some Eastern practices? Because they don't network in that way, right? They're sort of stuck in their own rut. And if nothing else, I feel like just talking about practices like acupuncture, that is another option for people who, especially with pain, feel so hopeless because they're just so immobilized with pain. So, I mean, I think just spreading the word and sharing the benefits that are available to these individuals, I think is a great service that you do. And hopefully this podcast will also do for other people in the general community to know that, there are all sorts of options. And if Western medicine doesn't fix you in the ways that you want, there are lots of Eastern practices that are available. You just have to look for them and find somebody reputable, get a reference, and open up a whole different toolbox full of options that you might not have even considered.
Yeah.
But I know I've taken up a ton of your time. We're already at like 45 minutes. It's been a long time. And so I want to thank you so much for taking your afternoon. I am so fascinated by acupuncture and other Eastern medicine practices that I'm needle adverse. So I'm not somebody who would be like, oh, acupuncture is right for me. But at the same time, I know that it is definitely something that's available to me if I need it. And so I really appreciate people like you going out and talking about it, practicing it, and also finding new strategies for things like PTSD and pain and other things that, in my history as a drug counselor, we created the opioid crisis because we just started throwing pain meds around like Tic Tacs, and now we have a whole different problem. And so there are holistic ways to help people that don't create another set of problems that could be as devastating, if not more devastating, to the individual that we were treating. So thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
I could add just two things real quick, just what you said.
Of course.
When you're saying the needle adverse, actually, when I decided to become an acupuncturist, my family said, well, Dana, you hate needles. So I actually have to go get a blood draw this week, and I am dreading it. And so but the acupuncture needles are so small and they're so fine. And so like I needle myself, professionally I needle people every day. So it's a very different, I know for myself and other patients that I've had when they say their needle at burst, like, oh, let's just try this one. And most people do say, oh, it's a lot more relaxing than I thought it would be. And it's one of the most frequent feedbacks I get. And then we are trained too that we know that we can't help everything. And then it is to like, I work to refer people out or encourage them at times to like, oh, you need to go see a specialist for this. So you need to talk to your primary about that. So there's, yeah, we can do a lot, but I think just having that support from both sides of medicine would be great going forward too.
Yes. Well, thank you for debunking the needle issue, because I'm
Oh,
sure there are lots of people out there that
yeah.
have some fear of needles and say, oh, acupuncture would not be good for me. Though I've had friends of mine who've had acupuncture who have said they didn't feel the needle at all, that
Yeah.
because it is so thin, and with the experience of a good acupuncturist, it really makes a huge difference. So, yes, let me not turn anybody against
Oh,
acupuncture.
no, and I just wanted to say, like, I have a personal experience with that too. And so I think that helps a number of my patients. And one thing, and back to just making sure they're comfortable and communicate too, is that, if I do something that is uncomfortable, let me know. I don't, this is what it should feel like. This is what it should not feel like. So if you're feeling these things, let me know and I can adjust it or take it out. So I think that also just goes with kind of our bedside manner from our profession as well. But yeah, I know that the needle aspect, actually, I can show you they don't come up very well, but this is I don't know if you can see that 10 pack. So they're really small.
Wow, thank you so much for showing us that.
But they're really, they're tiny. So several of them can fit inside the hole of a needle that's used for inoculations and blood
Oh,
draws.
wow.
So
Yeah, that's a good visual too.
yeah.
But thank you, Dana, so much for sharing your travel logs with us, as well as your acupuncture journey. I mean, I think it's a beautiful combination, because that's what makes you the dynamic practitioner you are, because you bring what needs to help a person and you can understand based on all the different experiences you've had. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's so honored for you to invite me to be part of your podcast. So thank you so much.